first obligation under this contract is a higher obligation than paying for the police and fire departments of the city of Detroit, that they have to pay this trash fee first before they can provide for police and fire.
Why does the city continue to do that?
Well, the part of the reason why the city has continued to do this is, this goes back to another sort of historical artifact, is that, and it's going to take me a while to sort of work through the history of it. What happened is that when the facility was built in around 1989, they went online and the emissions were far worse than what they were supposed to be. So mercury content was too high, and the emissions were far worse than they had originally anticipated. So they had to add pollution controls to the facility. They were required by the state to add additional pollution controls. And the original cost of construction was over $400 million. And so they issued bonds for that. Well, they had to issue additional bonds to pay for the pollution controls. Now, why the company that built the facility wasn't responsible for producing a facility that met the specifications of the emission regulations of the state, I don't know why they weren't held accountable for that, but anyway, the city of Detroit ended up having to pay for these additional pollution controls. Additional bonds were issued for about $113 million to add these pollution controls. Well, that was around 1991, or 1990, 1991. The city of Detroit was in a financial crisis at the time. So they had to put these pollution controls on in order to get the facility operating, but they didn't have the money and they needed to do something about it. So the solution that someone came up with, well, I don't know who proposed this, but what they did was they decided to sell the facility so that the city of Detroit no longer owned this facility that it was now in debt for over $500 million. So they sold the facility to a private business trust that was composed of two companies. The Philip Morris Capital Corporation, which is a branch of the Philip Morris Tobacco, and Aircraft Services Corporation, which is a subsidiary of General Electric. So Philip Morris Tobacco owns 70% of the facility, and General Electric owns 30% of the facility. They get federal tax breaks for being the owner of the facility, a private owner of the facility. But a public owner doesn't get those kinds of tax breaks. So as a private owner, they get these federal tax breaks, and that's a benefit to them. The additional arrangement that they made is that they bought the facility, and then they lease it back to the city of Detroit. And the amount of the lease that the city has to pay for the lease is roughly equivalent to the property taxes that the private owners should pay for it. So basically, essentially, it's privately owned and no property taxes are being paid because it's equivalent, it's a wash with the lease amount. The additional requirement that the new private owners added on is that if they ever closed the facility prior to the 20-year or the original 20-year lifetime, is that the city would have to pay financial penalties for the lost tax benefits that the private owners would have. And that is one of the key reasons why the city has been locked into this arrangement where they can't shed themselves of the facility because of these extra penalties that they would have to pay for closing it down. So the other reason is why they're now considering extending it even beyond the potential 2009 closure date is because there's one contract that actually extends beyond 2009. It's because of these financial interests, private financial interests in the facility, that the city of Detroit has basically been held captive to holding on to the facility. And when the sale actually happened, the actual content of the sale was very interesting as well. I mentioned that the city of Detroit at the time was in a financial crunch. Well, the sale price of the facility at the time was about $630 million. But the city of Detroit only received as cash in the sale to help deal with its budget problem. The city of Detroit only received $54 million. The vast majority of the sale was in mortgage notes, and basically over the period of time, that portion of the sale has been paid, so to speak, paid over that period of time. And so, in terms of actual, cash received, it was less than 10 cents on the dollar for what the considered value of the facility was at the time of the sale. And the rest of it was all these monies that were put into escrow accounts or mortgage notes, all these sort of other future financial obligations instead of an actual cash amount at the time. So but hopefully those amounts can be applied towards the conditions for being able to actually close the facility in 2009. It's considered one of the most complex financial transactions that had ever taken place up to that point in time.
What contract extends beyond 2009?